Hello, everybody. Good morning. To survive the wonderful dinner last night. And we're already getting into the conversation about making better and deeper use of the wealth of data that is, as we have just heard, not always fully analyzed or put to uses we have perhaps not thought about. The previous ones all focused on improving the assessment about the resource situation. And I want to walk you a little bit into expanded waters in relation to that. Well, of course, we have all celebrated this paper about FishBase being in the top 1% of all cited publications, and the multiple use that is being made from it. Much of that is, of course, of a more academic nature, but I think there are a number of possibilities to explore utilizations that go beyond understanding in academic things, like what we heard about taxonomy, fish habitat, or parasites, or things like that. Of course, we're living in the Anthropocene right now, and the combination of widespread overfishing, climate change, and pollution, as well as a range of other effects of our human technological development and innovations, have led us into what we now realize with rockstream as a planetary crisis which affects countries and societies in a very uneven manner. Here in Europe, we are in a rather privileged situation, while many countries in the global south, where they have not provoked or contributed very little to that crisis, but they take the brunt of the effects. And we see that power and resources are getting more and more concentrated at the expense of those who contributed less to the mess we find ourselves in. And of course, we all see about the most recent military crisis, whether it's Sudan, Gaza, Ukraine, etc., at a period where really, more than anything, we need international cooperation and accountability of how we deal with the resources. Now, we have these wonderful processes, mostly hosted by the United Nations, where over years, lawyers, politicians, technical experts, lobbyists, civil society organizations meet and negotiate what to do next to address those crises. And one that is particularly close to our minds, of course, and to our hearts, is that the governments have agreed in December 2022, the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework that asks everybody to set aside 30% of territories in the sea and on the land to allow, to bring a halt to what it has been termed the sixth mass extinction of species. A similar trend in the BBNG Treaty to Protect the High Seas that comes under the Law of the Sea legal framework. Yet what we find left, right, and center is that even though the magic works, that they can find consensus in these international fora, it is very, very hard to translate that into change on the ground. And part of that is, of course, that when they are engaged in this long negotiation, they get to know each other better. There is some trust that is built up, but the lawyers and the politicians do not always have very strong connections to and feet on the ground and translate the experience of that process to the populations, to various interest groups, often with very opposing interests. So what we then find is that while oftentimes technologies scale rather well, we see that the approaches to manage the social dimensions that are affected and partially also drive those developments, the technological developments, even in cases, I don't know, think of Coca-Cola, think of various global brands, Amazon, what have you, they are not really perceived equally in every place they may be present. So what Sheila Jasanoff in her research shows is that, yes, technologies can scale very well, social issues don't. So it's not one size fits all. And what may work in one place does not necessarily work in another. So now what I want to do is share with you a couple of a little experience and some ideas of what we might do to bring these global knowledge and understandings and analysis tools we have into a sphere where we rub more effectively shoulders with the differentiated social and economic settings, and therefore add a huge value to the work that is being done here in the consortium and the many collaborators we have around the world. One thing we were doing earlier this year in preparation already for World Ocean Day, 8th of June, we interviewed lots of people in different walks of life who have to do with marine protected areas. And we remember we are supposed to establish 30% of all territories, whether there is intensely inhabited or more open spaces. It's a huge challenge. Some scientists say we need to protect even more, but somehow we have to balance with how people live and what needs to change. And so on the basis of these interviews with experts in various fields and doing literature research, we developed 11 roles of people, from a manager of a marine protected area to civil society organizations, small-scale fishers, women in fisheries, wind farm manager, various types of people who confront themselves with, okay, are we accepting a marine protected area and where is it supposed to go? And we then we developed that role play with having young people in mind who are not normally associated with these big international associations, but who will bear the brunt, even more so than us, in my generation anyway, of the trends that we are seeing we need to change. So if they are not at the forefront of actually getting it done, it is hard to see how it's going to happen. And so we tested that in a number of settings to start with. And the idea is that they impersonate these different roles and enter into a conversation, the objective of which is to say, okay, beyond the nice words and so on, how do we make it actually work? How do we balance what trade-offs are acceptable to make it work? And so this is a very small thing, but the material is all available to anybody who would like to try. We also got some feedback that was very valuable. One of the important things we figured was that the greatest learning effect for the young people was not during the conversation and the often confrontational discussion, but when they were doing the debriefing afterwards and taking a step back and reflecting. That was when the biggest sort of learn effect occurred. And it's important to moderate that and with a focus on the experience of the user, and then perhaps offer additional information and possibilities to act. Now, and this is at the moment very small scale, but we are happy to offer that to many others who would like to use it. A much bigger scale potential opportunity or potential for us is when we think, we have data on, let's say, species introduction and invasiveness, and we have traits in the databases. And when we look at what the vectors for those introductions are, is very often maritime transport. The maritime transport industry is 10 billion tons per year. It has grown extraordinarily. It is projected to extend even more. These ships, they drive the global markets, and they are major vectors of transporting species from one place of the ocean into another. The IMO has, for decades, traveled under the radar in the international negotiations, but finally they were present in Paris for the agreement, climate agreement. To recall, they account for more than 3% of global emissions, and they exceed what the aeronautics industry is emitting. Besides the material mobilization that is represented by international trade, and that is, as we have seen in the second slide about the planetary boundaries, cannot be maintained indefinitely like this. Now, the IMO, after much foot dragging, has set up a subcommittee on pollution prevention and response that works now on guidance for water cleaning, for in-water cleaning of the ship hulls to minimize the transfer of invasive aquatic species that involves the biofouling of the ships. Obviously, it is also good if they do that regularly to reduce resistance and reduce fuel consumptions. We have made contact earlier this year with a group, an international group that is called Seakeepers. They actually are in contact and manage yachts, private yachts, that the yacht owners are not using at a time, but willing to put at the disposal of citizen science. And we now, recreational boats are, of course, another vector of these invasive species. As Eileen Ullmann and others showed, for example, in the Mediterranean. And these boats are slow-moving, so they, to some extent, they even transport more easily than the big ones that have very high speeds. The seakeepers are interested in doing that and helping with sampling, and the University of Pavia, where they have also contacts with IMO and are experts in biofouling identification, is interested in helping to do that. Now, in the last minute I have, let me go into even perhaps more ambitious territory. And to throw some ideas at you or ask questions, can you imagine that we become active in this arena with all the wealth of information and analytical tools we have? Well, you will have heard that after long feet dragging in the last COP, they agreed, in the previous COP, they agreed to establish a fund for loss and damage after long resistance. And in the last COP 27, they agreed to start putting money into it. So this loss and damage fund is now being, or let's say a transitional committee was set up to elaborate a recommendation and establish the institutional arrangement so that it can become operational. For the time being, the World Bank has been proposed and has now accepted to be the interim secretariat for the first 4 years. It means, as a fiduciary financial institution, it means the World Bank has to change
Cornelia,
some of its
if you could,
its own rules. Because what happened in previous big funds was that 80 to 90% of the funding was managed by big international banks or a handful of UN organizations. In this case, it is particularly geared towards helping to compensate some of the damage suffered by countries in the global south. And importantly, the steering committee for that, the board of trustees, was established recently in the Philippines, and it has a small majority of people, of representatives from developing countries. Now, let me just mention how they approach that. Is the loss and damage can result from extreme weather events like cyclones, drought, heat waves, etc., but also from slow onset changes such as sea level rise, desertification, ocean acidification, and so on. And the damages can result in economic losses or non-economic losses. And these, these can be a bit of overlap because there are efforts ongoing on mitigation, adaptation, and some of these mix. Now, to bring it to our forum here, we have data in FishBase and SeaLifeBase for country lists, etc. We have aqua maps for distribution. We have the sea around us catch reconstructions that have long time series so that we can also at least to some extent reproduce things, developments over time. And the Fisheries Economics Research Unit with Rashid Sumaila has done value estimates and so on. So the question is, can we imagine that we develop tools that help developing countries establish justified claims and distinguish between what is the result of climate change and what is the result of overfishing? It's probably not trivial, but it will be worth, I think, a trial. And we could increase the social and economic and cultural benefit of what we do in multiple ways, I think. Thank you very much.